Hey everyone, and welcome to a nice late night Draft League retrospective. So today, it's going to be me versus Cap, and I'm going to do things a little bit differently to how we normally do it. So what we're going to be doing today is a 2-in-1. So I play Cap in the league stage of the draft, and then I meet him again in the finals. And between our game in the league and the finals, there are numerous trade windows where we can swap out some mons, patch up any weaknesses, make any adjustments that we need necessary. So how I'm going to be doing this is that we're going to quickly go over the first game, and then from that, in the second game, we're going to look at how I and how Cap go about improving and changing our teams based on what we learn from the first game. So going into this game, Cap has again got the Drakazult and Gigalith core, with the Drakazult benefiting from the Sand Rush with the sand that Gigalith sets up. He's got a Choice Scarf Greninja, some utility in the Mew and the Whimsicott, and the Alolan Muck to wall things. On my side, the plan going into this game for me is that Mismagius, Alolan Muck is a really good switch into. And what this Mismagius wants to do is Will-O-Wisp the Muck on the switch, then Memento it, then go into the Komodo, which is Substitute, Salac Berry, Belly Drum. And it can set up very easily on a Muck that is that weakened. So my game plan going in is pretty much just to cheese the fuck out of him. And what I've also got is a Mudsdale, which is the main Drakazult switch in, a defensive Milotic to try and answer the Greninja, especially defensive that is, and a Choice Banded Zygarde because the only ground resist on his team is the very frail Whimsicott. So with that, we're going to get into it. And leading off, we'll turn off the music, and we see that the Milotic is met with the Greninja lead. And the thing with Greninja in these kinds of situations is that it is just so versatile that turn one, you want to play it safe and be very careful. So what I'm thinking is that whilst the flip turn out could look kind of free, I'm worried about a potential Grassy MZ with Grass Knot that is going to just blow my shit up. And then if I flip turn out, then I'm on low health and it's going to be very hard for me to get a chance to recover back up. This Greninja is Choice Scarf, but it can also be Z Celebrate, Z any number of coverage moves, Life Orb, a variety of things. But we're going to see the U-turn, turn one, and I just go straight for the Ice Beam, which the Alolan Muck is going to absorb quite easily. And then after that, I'm able to flip turn out, bringing in my Mudsdale on the Substitute from Cap, now the Toxic, as I just break that Substitute. And after that, the Muck is going to be forced out into the Mew, and I go for the Heavy Slam, which is just in case he decides to go into Whimsicott to try and absorb the Earthquake and threaten me out. But he doesn't do that. He is smarter and goes the Mew, which is going to be able to sponge any kind of hit. Toxic, and then I'm going to make the pretty aggressive switch into Mismagius. And the thing with this is that I can, on an Ice Beam, just go into Milotic and flip turn out and be on the front foot, but Mew is another of those mons that is just so versatile that it's very difficult to know what you want to do against it. It could trick something, a Choice Scarf, it could be physical, it could start setting up with something like a Nasty Plot and then start threatening me. There's just so much that a Mew can do that it's difficult to know what to go into against it, and Mismagius in this instance ends up being fine. Now I'm expecting the Muck here, but Cap is going to go into the Greninja, which is a very aggressive play, but also a good play that gets him on the front foot and works out very well for him. as the Greninja doesn't really care about being burnt and is immediately able to start threatening my team a lot more so than the Muck could, which just lets Mudsdale straight back in. And even if I were to go for something like a Shadow Ball, that's not going to do very much damage. And if I have some kind of coverage like Thunderbolt or Dazzling Gleam, then I'm unlikely to go for it when the Muck is right there. So around a burn damage, and I just go back into the Milotic on the U-turn. And at that point, I did think, surely he U-turns here, but I didn't think that it was worth risking my whole Miss Magus and just throwing out a Mon that early. So I decided to just cede the momentum in order to play it safe. In comes the Muck, and easiest flip turn out of my entire life, back into that Mudsdale. Which isn't that sustainable in the long run because of the Toxic, but I am actually a rest-sleep talk Mudsdale. The rationale being that Dracozolt can quite easily wear me down and then run through me, so I need some more longevity. But that doesn't want to take an Earthquake, so he switches out into the Mew. And this time, I just go for the Earthquake very freely because he's seen the Heavy Slam, which is going to discourage going into the Whimsicott. And so I can just get guaranteed damage on whatever I want. This time, I'm going to go into the Milotic. And the reason for the Milotic over the Miss Magus is that the Mew is shown already that it's a special attacker, which Milotic is likely just able to wall. And just generally, you don't want to be going the same thing over and over again if you can help it, because it makes you too predictable. In this case, we see the Dark Pulse trying to catch that Miss Magus again. But now I'm able to just flip turn out very freely. In comes the Gigalith, which is a bit weird switching it in on a water type, but it's not going to take much from a flip turn. I never Scald now, I always flip turn for momentum, because Scald into something like Whimsicott or Mew or even Greninja is just weird and not really that good. But this is going to let me bring in that choice-banded Zygarde. And now one of the things about drafts is that mons like Zygarde generally need plus speed nature, jolly, maximum speed. But looking at Cap's team in my preparation, I'm not outspeeding the Greninja anyway, and the next fastest thing he has is the Mew, which I'm still faster than with an adamant nature boosting my attack. And that's going to come into play here, as the choice-banded Earthquake does 75% on the Iron Defense. Now, the reason for that Iron Defense is that if I'm not a choice-banded Adamant Zygarde, then after the Iron Defense, I'm not doing enough damage to kill with the next hit, and you just get a body press off very easily, and you're recovering numerous turns of leftovers, and you're generally doing okay. But as is, I am choice-banded Adamant, and so at that point, Cap just has to sack his Gigalith, because nobody is switching into that. Whimsicott takes like 50-odd%. This does let in the Dracozolt as I go back into the Mudsdale, getting my stamina. The reason that does so much damage is because I'm actually especially defensive Mudsdale, because I was thinking going in that Cap could very easily run a mixed Dracozolt with the Draco Meteor to wear me down more easily, and Mudsdale has such good physical defense and HP and the stamina ability to the point that I thought I don't need to be maximum physical defense to take these hits. But Cap is going to just stay in and Dragon Claw here, and the reason that he does that is because the Sandstorm is about to run out. The Dracozolt isn't doing all that much without it, because suddenly Komodo, Glalie, Miss Magus, and Zygarde all just outspeed and kill it, so there's not really that much use in hanging on to it. And I go for a maybe slightly superfluous Heavy Slam, which in retrospect I didn't really need to go for. I've already shown that I have that, and so it would be very risky for Cap to make that Whimsicott switch, especially when throwing out the Dracozolt is pretty much fine in this case. But here, Mudsdale shows why it is a beast, as it lives another hit with the stamina, kills with the Earthquake before dying to the Toxic. And that's going to give us a double down. Now, on this double down, where for anyone that's not aware, you both switch into someone at the same time without either person knowing what the other's going to go into. My mindset is that if I go anybody other than Milotic, I'm immediately very threatened by the Greninja. I probably have to just go Milotic on the probable U-turn, ceding the momentum and giving Cap the advantage. And so I expect him to go Whimsicott to try and punish that Milotic. And so I go into British people, the Mega Glalie, Mega Evolve, and boom, Double Edge, 53%. And this damage is really good because it is getting me closer and closer to, rather than the end game that I'd initially been going for with the Komoa, this is bringing me closer to a zygarde end game. Because as we see at this point, 30%, 41%, the Muck and the Whimsicott are the only things that I need to damage before a Choice Banded Extreme Speed is going to just beat the rest of his team. And so at this point, I notice that and I decide that is going to be easier and more feasible than setting up with Komoa. And so I'm going to start playing differently from here on out. And at this stage, I'm really expecting the U-turn, but I just don't quite have it in me to risk throwing out the Glalie for no reason. And so I'm going to just make, in fact, not the Milotic, I'm going to go Miss Magus. And the reason for that is that if he does U-turn, then he doesn't really have anything that good to go into, because the Muck I'm going to burn and then set up with Komoa, and anything else I'm outspeeding the Mew and the Whimsicott isn't killing me and it's taking a big hit. And also just because now that I'm playing towards an endgame of Zygarde rather than of Komoa, I don't need the Miss Magus to facilitate the Komoa endgame anymore. So it's kind of fine for me to risk sacking it. And at this point, after the Hydro Pump, I could have gone Milotic, but I was just kind of being a bit paranoid, and I was still thinking, I don't 100% know that this is Choice Scarf, because we haven't seen a Z move yet, and so the Z Grass Knot is still a possibility. And Greninja can also run things like Expert Belt if it really wants to. And it was almost definitely Scarf at this point. U-turn really points towards it being Scarf. I just didn't, at the time, want to take that risk. But anyway, another round of burn, and now I do just go Milotic, decide that is worthwhile, flip turn on the Muck, and now we get the Glalie back in. And the reason for Glalie here, rather than Zygarde, is because Cap could go hard Whimsicott on the Zygarde, take 50%, but then he's back on the front foot and I have to switch. Whereas Glalie is guaranteed value, just a guaranteed kill with the Refrigerate boosted Double Edge. So Cap just decides to leave in the Muck, it goes down, and Milotic, again, I'm expecting U-turn, I want to just stay in, but I can't quite. And at this point, as he goes Whimsicott, this immediately looks advantageous for him, just tight matchup-wise and the difficulty I have switching into a Whimsicott. But the thing I realised is that Milotic has such amazing special defense, and Whimsicott isn't that strong. So I'm going to live a hit, and I'm going to be able to Ice Beam. And then once I do that, Zygarde is ready to just come in and Extreme Speed everybody. So he's not even Giga Drain, so we won't see any recovery coming out of it, as I'm free to just let the Milotic go down, bring in the Zygarde 10%, and just click Extreme Speed 3 times. The crit didn't matter. Mew's going to come in, it's also going to die, and then out comes the Greninja, ready to die as well. So that was the first game, and the takeaway from that is that Cap is really, really weak to Zygarde, is the main thing, and so we'll see how he adapts in the semi-final to accommodate for that. And I also see from that this kind of cheesy Komoa endgame is Cap is not the kind of player that's going to let me just do that. And so I start thinking about how I can better use the Komoa in such a way that it's good through the whole game. And that also makes me think that the Mismagus, which is outsped and threatened by the Greninja and cannot touch the Alolan Muck in the slightest, is just a bit superfluous. And so I can start thinking about both who can I draft in to be better and who can I bring in that spot instead. So that was the first game, and now we're going to move on to the second game. So what we see here is, on my side, I get rid of the Mega Glalie, which is more or less unrelated to this game, because it was all right against Cap in that first one, but by and large, Mega Glalie just kind of sucks in drafts. It's just too limited, too one-dimensional, just not that helpful or useful. And so I decide to replace it with the Mega Diancie in this case, which is offensively very strong against his whole team. It's not like instant sweeping threats, but it just hits everything reasonably hard. I also decide to get in the Shaymin, and what this Shaymin does is that it really weirdly effectively checks Dracozolt in that it resists Bolt Beak, Dragon Claw isn't really quite strong enough to break it, and while a mixed Dracozolt does like to run Fire Blast, that's just not going to do enough damage against especially defensive Shaymin. And what that Shaymin also has that Mudsdale didn't have so much is the longevity, in that it can go for a rest and then switch out with the natural cure. And that's a thing that I didn't mention in the previous game, was that whilst the Mudsdale, it was rest and sleep talk, I didn't in the end up wanting to go for the rest on it. And that's because I thought about it for ages in the game. I tried really hard to think 4 or 5 turns into the future. But I just came to the conclusion that if I rest, it's too passive and it just gives Cap the initiative every time. And even with Sleep Talk, that's just a crapshoot of will I get the right move? And I didn't feel like it was quite fast enough and it just wasn't quite working. Whereas the Shaymin can just rest and then switch out and then be good to go again. I did draft it more for my previous game against Aeon than I did for Cap, but it is still very useful against Cap. And the Obstagoon is just one of my favourite mons to use in a draft format, and it just felt very natural to bring that thing in for my trade window for the finals, because I'm just comfortable using it, I know how to use it, I enjoy using it. And against Cap's team, it's coming in on the Muck, the Dracozolt, the Tapu Bulu, and just smacking somebody whenever it likes, really. On Cap's side, for the changes, the main thing is that he now has the Tapu Bulu. And what that, in theory, does is that it really just patches up his glaring weakness to the Zygarde 10%, because it resists earthquakes, it doesn't care about extreme speeds because it has good physical defense, it's immune to dragon attacks, and additionally, while grassy terrain is up, the power of earthquakes is halved. The Tapu Bulu is also very good in this game offensively because I just can't switch into it. The Zygarde dies, the Shaymin gets Mega Horned, the Milotic dies, the Obstagoon gets Mega Horned or close combated, the Diancie just dies to a grass hit, and the Komodo is obviously weak to Fairy. And so by bringing in that Tapu Bulu, Cap both patches up a big weakness on his team and offensively threatens me enormously. And what patching up that Zygarde weakness also allows him to do is that the Gigalith doesn't have to be max physical defense to stand a chance against an unchoice banded Zygarde, and it just lets him kind of, with the rest of his team, not have to worry so much about it. Even though in the first game his undoing was Zygarde, he can still get away with bringing Gigalith, Dracozolt, Muck, all of which get blown up by Zygarde, because he has that Tapu Bulu to keep it in check. And so in this game, The win conditions for Cap are that the Tapu Bulu, anytime he gets in on something like Milotic, I have to either make a very risky switch or just sack somebody. And it's never going to be sweeping just because I can bring in the Obstagoon, the Komodo with Poison Jab, the Diancie to hit it, to outspeed and hit it, etc. So it won't sweep me, but whenever we can get it in, I have to either sack someone or take a huge risk, and he's massively forcing progress. And so the way that Cap is going to win this game is he's going to get that Tapu Bulu in, he's going to threaten me with that, and that's going to open up holes such that the Greninja or the Dracozolt can just defeat me, because I'm very close to losing to Dracozolt without the Shaman when it's in the sand. And likewise, the Milotic goes down, suddenly everybody is getting Ice Beamed. So with that, in fact, no, not quite, I have a few more things to go over. So the Tapu Bulu is just an offensive variant. There's Choice Scarf Greninja again, which what that does is that it ensures Cap doesn't just lose to a Komodo that's able to get a Dragon Dance or a Clangorous Soul Blaze off, because he's still going to be able to outspeed it and Ice Beam it, along with the Dracozolt in the sand, also kind of stopping that from happening. The Gigalith is now carrying the Toxic as well, which we're going to see is important, because the plan in the first game was for the Muck to be able to Toxic the Milotic, but I would just outspeed and flip turn out every single time. The Dracozolt, off the top of my head, I believe is Life Orb this time round. And we've got a physically defensive Mew with the Psychinium Z. Although, going into this game, I'm again thinking that Greninja, it could be anything. It could be, after we saw how good Milotic was in the first game, it could be Grass Knot, Grassium Z, again, powered up by the grassy terrain. It could just be another Scarf one to not lose to Komodo. It could be Z Celebrate with Grass Knot and Ice Beam, which would be existentially horrifying. For me, it could be all manner of things. Greninja is an insanely good Draftmon for that reason. But those are Cap's win conditions, and on my side, dealing with the Tapu Bulu means that zygarde is again going to be really good, and I have a way to do that I'm not going to reveal quite yet. The Shaman defensively is really nice. It can be very annoying, very hard to break, and I just need to kind of make sure that I'm not ceding too much momentum with that turn that I go for the rest. The Milotic is, again, you saw in the first game how good Flip Turn is at gaining that momentum, and if I'm able to figure out that the Greninja isn't a Grassium Z or a Z Celebrate, then I can go into it on that Greninja a lot. But yeah, my win con, get rid of the Tapu Bulu, threaten with the Zygarde, play towards an endgame of my Dragon Dance Komodo this time round, and the Obstagoon and the Diancie and the Zygarde are there to punch the necessary holes such that the Komodo can try to clean up. So with that, we are going to get into it. And with the leads, I lead Obstagoon as he leads Tapu Bulu. And the reason that I lead Obstagoon is that on anybody that I'm slower than, I can just parting shot my way out. And the Facade is really nice. The only resist is the Gigalith, which is still going to take a good chunk and then get parting shotted on. And I'm just thinking, who can I lead with that is going to offensively pressure him? He leads Tapu Bulu, which is a good lead because, as we've established, I don't switch into that thing. And so, suppose I lead my Milotic, hoping to flip turn out on the Greninja or Scald the potential Gigalith for Stealth Rocks. He is almost immediately getting a kill. I'm going to obstruct, which is done for two reasons. The first is that if he stays in, then I'm maybe a bit more thinking that he could be Choice Scarf. The second is to get the defense drop off that Mega Horn. And now after this, I calc that a Choice Scarf Tapu Bulu doesn't quite kill me with a Mega Horn, and so I could just Facade and kill it if he decides to go for that. But Cap is going to be smarter than that as he goes Gigalith, and still takes 34 off a resisted Facade because Obstagoon is ridiculous. And with the leftovers in the grassy terrain, that isn't bothering him that much. And after the Protect on my parting shot, he's almost back up to full. And so he just kind of has the momentum now as I parting shot out. And the other thing about the Protect on the parting shot is that he now knows that I'm switching out rather than close combating. So he can very safely get up his Stealth Rocks, which is just always nice to have. And I don't have removal on this team. And in retrospect, the Mega Diancie, I perhaps wanted to get Mega'd sooner so that I could Magic Bounce, but I didn't like a lead that was forced out by the Greninja and forced out by the potential Choice Scarf Tapu Bulu, which I know that he could bring because he bought it in his last game. But now the Zygarde is in. And seeing the Tapu Bulu, I don't want Earthquake anymore. So I've just got the 1,000 Arrows as he goes for the safe Protect, scout what I want to do. If I overpredict, he just gets to stay in. But I'm going to just go for the 1,000 Arrows, and this one is Life Orb. And the important thing about this damage is that I go on the damage calcs, and from those calcs, I see that he has HP investment. He is very unlikely to be Choice Scarf. And now I'm going to reveal the most stupid thing that I found in prep for this game, which is that Zygarde 10% with its 61 special attack gets fucking Sludge Wave and is able to take out the Tapu Bulu on turn 7. And this is amazing for me because that thing just pressured me so badly, and there's so many nasty sequences where he could bring in the Greninja, threaten something out, U-turn, on the Milotic, in comes Tapu Bulu, I have to sack someone. He can do that pretty much as he likes, except now he can't because of Sludge Wave. And on Cap's side, you really can't fault him there because why the fuck does this thing get Sludge Wave? That's not a set, it's not a thing it can run, and it's one of those things that you can only pull off in a draft because a regular Zygarde 10% isn't ever running Sludge Wave because why the fuck would you? There's so many better things you could run. But because I know that the Tapu Bulu is the main answer, I'm able to run that Sludge Wave, which does something like 88-90% to a max HP Tapu Bulu. So the plan going in was let the Tapu Bulu absorb 1,000 arrows on the switch, and that does the necessary damage to kill it, and that works perfectly. And so at this point, it's advantage me, but the game very much is not over 7 turns in. And the Greninja is going to come in. And it goes for the U-turn, and the reason that I stay in here is actually kind of interesting. And it is, on one level, really smart, and on another level, really stupid. Which is because prior to this game, I'd been having a talk with Cap about just the kinds of players that we are. And we kind of agreed that the main difference is that he plays very kind of instinctually and intuitively, whereas I'm a lot more kind of methodical and careful. And because we just had that discussion, and also because of how I played against the Greninja last game, I'm thinking that his thought process is going to be, there is no way that Dan just leaves in the Zygarde and risks this amazing offensive presence, which is now so much better because the Tapu Bulu is gone, because nobody is switching into 1,000 Arrows now. There's no way that he just risks that, especially this early in the game. And so I stay in, and I predict the U-turn. But then, that bit, really smart, well done me. The next bit, I kind of don't quite make the next step that I have to make if I'm going to make the decision of he's going to go for the U-turn. And we'll see here what happens is I take the U-turn and he goes into the Mew and I glare it and I get synchronized and paralyzed. And now my Zygarde is nowhere near such a threat because the only thing it comes in on is Muck, and I might just get fully paralysed anyway. And the problem with this is, if I'm expecting the U-turn, then I need to think, okay, what does it U-turn into? And the only thing that makes sense to U-turn into is the Mew, because the Dracozolt, Gigalith, Muck are all just going to die. And so if I'm expecting the Mew, then what my play has to be is either extreme speed to get damage on the Greninja, do a good 50% immediately, or just 1,000 arrows, hit the Mew, and potentially force it to have to roost as I get a switch. But that doesn't happen. I paralyze the Mew and myself, and paralyzing the Mew is useful. It's not the absolute end of the world, but I think on the whole I would rather have had an intact Zygarde and an unparalyzed Mew. But anyway, that happens, and I'm just going to go hard Obstagoon to start trying to pressure as I take a Scald. And on a Mew, it's very difficult to know what you want to switch into, just in that it has so many moves. Like, by going Obstagoon, I'm risking just getting blown up by an Aura Sphere randomly. But the thought process is just that the Paralyzed Mew is kind of an opportunity to get something in that immediately pressures, and the only thing that can potentially one-shot the Mew is this Obstagoon. Whereas everything else, it can't OHKO it, and then it suddenly risks whatever random coverage or Thunder Wave or Toxic or any of the million things that a Mew can have that can threaten anybody. So the Obstagoon gets in, or it takes quite a lot of damage to do so, and now I just go for the very safe knockoff on the Gigalith, doing 51 because, again, Obstagoon, best mon ever. And after that, I wish I had close combat on this thing, and I considered it before the game, but I decided ultimately that the combination of Obstruct and Parting Shot would just give me so much utility that it's worth forgoing the close combat, which would have just killed the Gigalith here. But I'm going to Parting Shot out again, and the reason I do that despite the Protect possibility is that having protected already, Cap shouldn't protect here because he doesn't want to just give me a free switch into something if I just hard switch, having seen the failure of my Parting Shot last time. So I Parting Shot out, and the Milotic is going to come in, so named because he had mentioned before his annoyance at the way that the Milotic just flip turns out on everybody. And the Toxic misses, which, on the surface, is very jammy. But I would actually have rather have had this Toxic hit. And I'm going to explain why that is later when it comes up. But yeah, annoying hacks, but also wish it hit. And then, at this point, I just flip turn out because the Gigalith at -1 attack isn't too much of a threat, and I bring in Sonic OC, Le Shaman, and I don't care about the Toxic because I have Natural Cure, so I just switch out and I'm good again. And it doesn't really threaten me with any of its attacks, so it's just very safe. And this does allow in the Muck, but I'm able to Earth Power it, get a bit of damage off. The Earth Power is very free because it still hits the Gigalith and it just is going to do damage to whatever wants to come in. And now, on this Muck, I switch out and I just sack the Zygarde. And the reason for that is that, switch-ins wise, the Diancie isn't a good switch because it doesn't do that much damage to it. The Earth Power isn't going to kill, and then it has to take 2 hits from the Muck and risk getting poison touched. Obstagoon is going to die or come close to it from a poison jab, and its HP just generally, I need to be a bit more careful with it. Komoro is a win con that we'll see why in a bit, that I really don't want to be risking any HP on. And the Milotic is going to take the damage and lose its leftovers and get sandstormed and potentially get poisoned, and it's just too much. But the Obstagoon is now able to come back in, and Cap makes a correct play in going for the Protect, which is just because it's really free and it gets him an extra round of burn on my Obstagoon, whose HP is very quickly running out at this point. I just Facade again, because I think Knockoff, without the additional power of getting an item, still doesn't kill there, so I might as well just Facade. And I hard switch here because I'm expecting the Protect, but Cap makes a good play and goes for the Toxic, although, again, Shaman doesn't desperately care about being Toxic. And on the hard muck again, this time I just go for the Rest. Got all my HP back, and then I can just immediately cure it, but this time I have to go hard Milotic. And that's going to absorb a knockoff and get poison touched, regular poisoned, and take a shit ton of damage between the sand and the poison. Now, here, this is why I would rather have been Toxic, because Toxic does 6, 12, 18, incrementally 6% more every turn, whereas Poison just does 12 per turn forever. And yes, Toxic is worse in the long run, but in the short term, it takes 3 turns before Poison and Toxic do an equal amount of damage. On the turns prior to that, you'd rather be Toxic. And the thing with that is, I don't really leave the Milotic in for that many turns. And so I'm actually taking more damage from this unlucky proc of Poison Touch than I would have been from the Toxic hitting originally. But he protects on my recover, and I think the reason for the Protect is just to get an extra round of Poison and Toxic on my Milotic, but I also don't really agree with it because it just gives me that recover and means that I can continue to not care about Ice Beams from the Greninja a lot more easily, whereas you kind of can just keep Poison jabbing and try and keep my health as low as possible. But I just scold at this point, my thought process being that he can't do loads of damage to me, especially now that I have the Marvel scale boosting my defense while I'm statused, and so I can just quite freely fish for a burn, and if he attacks I can just recover up later, which is what happens here. And at this point, he could still be Z-Grass, and that wouldn't be very good for me, but also if I'm able to learn that he is Grassy MZ, then I know that, and it's not as much of a threat to the rest of my team, and so I don't need the Milotic for it as badly. The other problem is that, much as I would like to just recover here again and see what he wants to do, if he is Z-Celebrate, then recover comes very close to just losing me the game. Although having U-turn makes him less likely to be Z-Celebrate because Greninja wants a lot of moves at the best of times. Z-Celebrate needs all the coverage that it can get, and you don't want to waste one of those slots on U-turn that's just going to switch you out. But I still ended up deciding I don't want to just lose the game instantly by getting Z-Celebrated on. And so I take a lot from the Grass Knot, unboosted, showing he's probably Scarf again, and I flip turn out. And at this point, I can just go into Komodo because, well, I've more or less sussed out that he's Scarf, and so I just get a pretty free close combat. And Cap is going to go into the Alolan Muck here, take a whole lot from a close combat. And I think the reason that he goes Muck rather than the Mew here is most likely that he doesn't want the Mew to take the damage from a Z Clangorous Soul, which I would be a lot more free to go for with the Fairy dead. And then between the big damage from that and the potential for paralysis, I have a lot more likelihood that I can just immediately break through that Mew. And so it's fine to risk a bunch of health on the not so important Muck, which can also heal up with its Black Sludge and its Protect, just in case I am that. I think that's good, cautious play from Cap. But now that he sees I'm close combat, he can Protect on the next close combat because, annoyingly, Dragon Claw isn't quite doing enough to kill. And then he gets a pretty free Mew as I just have to close combat again. Because my thought process is that if he does decide to get cheeky and leave the Muck in, I'm at minus defense, I could get poisoned. It just wouldn't be good for me to try and do something cute, predicting, and then throw out a load of HP on my Komodo. So I just close combat again, does nothing, shows that there's a lot of physical defense on this Mew. And at this point, I feel confident enough to just go hard into my Diancie. And I take a Z Genesis Supernova. And with that, I mean, I could have gone Obstagoon as a sack, taken the rocks and died to burn, but I'm still thinking at some point Obstagoon can come in on something that it's faster than, like the Muck or the Dracozolt. Although I think in doing that, I forgot that the Muck could protect. But whatever the case, I don't desperately need HP on the Diancie because it dies to Greninja anyway, and it should be killing everything else other than the Muck. Other than the Mew, given that the Muck is on such low HP. The other reason for this is that I wanted to get my Stealth Rocks up, which is because at 6%, the Gigalith is going to die, it's not going to get its stand up, and the Dracozolt just isn't a threat anymore. And then I don't have to bother preserving the Shaman anywhere near so much. But yeah, I take a shit ton from a Genesis Supernova, and I just Mega up and get my Stealth Rocks up, dying to the Scald in the process, which maybe this is a bit impatient from me not going into the Shaman after I see that this is a special attacking Mew that won't be able to touch me. But oh well, dead Diancie. And after that, I'm going to just bring in the Milotic because I can recover up. Since the Mew is paralyzed and I outspeed, and Cap aggressively goes Dracozolt there, which is pretty safe because if I go for a move, it's probably Flip Turn. But that would be stupid if the Mew just stays in and then I have to switch something else into an attack. But the Dracozolt is able to come in. He's extracting the maximum value out of it because even without Sand, it's still scary on something it outspeeds and can Bolt Beak. So that's a good play. But I'm able to go Shaman, and Shaman is going to just show its worth as the Dracozolt answer that you never knew you needed. And Earth Power is again very free. Does kind of bounce off the Mew, but at this point, I'm just thinking, I just keep Giga Draining because I'm recovering the HP, I'm getting leftovers, I might as well just keep going for it and healing myself up. And the other thing that I'm thinking is that there's always the chance that the Mew gets fully paralyzed, and then that just kind of fucks Cap over. So I Giga Drain again, and at this point we do see the full paralysis as it wanted to roost, which is unfortunate, though equally like it used a bunch of moves and paralysis, it's bound to happen eventually. And so Zygarde helps out once again from beyond the grave, and at this point I can just Earth Power because it kills the Mew and it hits whatever else he wants to go into harder. And he goes Muck here, which I think that you could potentially just sack the Mew to avoid having to risk this, but I get a Spadef drop, which is big because this means that even after the Protect, I'm able to kill. And I think the reasoning for going hard Muck is that without the Spadef drop, I'm not able to kill, and even though I bring it down to like 3%, it would still be able to force me out, potentially poison jab me. But as is, I get the Spadef drop, which forces him to go back into that Gigalith for the sack because he still needs the Muck. And that's going to let the Greninja back in, which is the freest U-turn ever because even if I stay in, it still hits me. And so I just sack the Obstagoon because at this point, it comes in on the Muck, which just protects and lets it die. And the Mew, it is paralyzed at 8%, but everybody comes in and does damage on a paralyzed 8% Mew. So there's not really sense in keeping it alive for that. And so at this point, it's 4-3 to Cap. And I think it's potentially still anyone's game, but it's difficult, increasingly difficult, to break through the Shaman Milotic core, which is because on the Greninja, you just kind of always have to get it right. Which one do I go into? Because you can't switch up moves, and so the Grass Knot bounces off the Shaman. If you U-turn on the Milotic, then you have to switch something else into a Scald. That's just difficult and awkward, but then conversely, I have to keep both of those mons healthy, meaning that a lot of the time I've got to rest, I've got to recover, And that gives Cap the chance to bring his attackers and threats in. And so we have this sort of weird dynamic of, am I able to keep everything that needs to be healthy in such a way that I can deal with him? Whereas, is Cap able to use the free initiative that he gets from my having to keep everyone healthy to his advantage, to the point that I then can't keep everyone healthy anymore? So Muck is back in, and so I just go Komodo because that's the only thing that's able to kill. And Cap is going to just sack the Mew, which is smart because what they're doing, it's paralyzed at 8%. That lets the Dracozolt back in. I'm able to go Shaman on it, and Dragon Claw just isn't really strong enough to break me. But now we see the Fire Blast, which the specially defensive Shaman still tanks, and it's able to kill the Dracozolt with the Earth power. And this is really good for me because it's getting increasingly difficult to break the Milotic, given that it can just kind of recover a bunch on a Grass Knot, and then I can go hard Komodo when I know that he's locked into Grass Knot. So that goes down, and in comes the Greninja. Again, very free U-turn, except he just goes for the Ice Beam, and I let the Shaman go down. At this point, I just go Milotic because it's a very free recover, easy, and as he goes Muck, which he kind of has to do because the Gren is doing like 11% or something with an Ice Beam. And at this point, I can just kind of scold a bunch until I burn him, because Knockoff, when I have no item and I have the Marble Scale, it's not ever doing anything. And so he kind of sees at that point that he needs to go back into the Greninja again to have any chance of hurting me, which he does. And I think at this point, it pretty much should be a wrap for me, because there's no one move that he can lock himself into that is going to beat Milotic and Komodo. And so I just need to kind of dance around the Greninja and keep the Milotic healthy enough that it's not going to die to the Ice Beam. He reveals the Grass Knot, not reveals, goes for it again as I flip turn out again, which does put me in a very nice position with the Komodo of basically just getting a kill. But equally, the Milotic is now on 36% and poisoned. So Cap's just going to sack off the Muck as I close combat. And I think at that range, Dragon Claw still wasn't going to kill the Greninja if he decided to leave it in. And so I felt like I have to close combat, despite the defense drops, to be guaranteed the kill. And now he goes Greninja. And see, at this point, it should just be over, because if he Ice Beams and kills me, then I just go Milotic and recover up and then Scold and eventually win. Whereas if he Grass Knots, then Komodo just takes like no damage and kills. Except, for reasons unbeknownst to me, I go hard Milotic, and I take an Ice Beam, and then Poison brings me into range of another Ice Beam. And this is where we kind of see that the regular poison instead of the toxic really comes into play, because if I was toxic, then I just take 6%, and I'm on 17, and this isn't a throw, this isn't snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, but as is, Milotic goes down. And so I just bring in the Komodo, who is on 88% and obviously weak to the Ice Beam. But I am Yachi Berry. And so close combat kills and wins me the game. Now, the thought process with this Yachi Berry from the beginning was that I'm trying to find something for the Komodo to do, and nothing is quite working, because I don't like Belly Drum anymore, because even after the Salak, the Dracozolt in the sand outspeeds me, the Scarf Greninja outspeeds me, it doesn't really have good opportunities to set it up, it just doesn't really quite work. But then Dragon Dance has the exact same problems. Defensive isn't really doing anything. And I didn't like Z because I felt that physical Komodo is generally more useful offensively against his whole team, rather than the special attack of Clangorous Soul Blaze. And while I could have run that specially mixed with attack investment and other physical attacks, I still just didn't really like it. And so I settled on the Yachi Berry because I was thinking that just if at any point the Greninja comes in on the Komodo, if I get a Dragon Dance and then he goes into the Greninja to outspeed and kill me, he doesn't kill me, I get rid of the Greninja, and then my life is much easier. But it was still a throw and still stupid to go Milotic, and the reason for that is that, yes, I was fine in the end, but if that Ice Beam froze me, then I'd have had to quit Pokemon. I'd just go play chess, go play something where luck doesn't have any impact. That would have been the end of my career. I'd have been very upset. Whereas by not switching into Milotic, even if that happens, then I can just recover up and be fine, and the Ice Beam's never breaking me. But doing it this way made it a bit more dramatic. It let me clickbait a bit more. So ultimately, all's well that ends well, I suppose. And I think both of these games, I think the main thing that you can see from them is just prep and its importance, because if the Tapu Bulu hadn't been Sludge Wave down, that would have been a completely different game. Because without the Sludge Wave, I'm then forced to switch out my Zygarde and sack something there, and then Cap can later on keep bringing it in and keep threatening me. And so Sludge Wave was amazing prep, which I only even saw it because I was just looking through all the moves that Zygarde gets on Showdown, and I saw Sludge Wave somewhere towards the bottom, and I saw its fucking 61 special attack. So it was very lucky on my end that I even knew that happened, and well, yeah, it's just the kind of thing that's so out there that, of course, Cap isn't gonna see it coming. And there's maybe some angle of, like, you could kind of scout for the Iron Tail, which is a bit more of a thing. But even then, it's like, well, you just Horn Leech and you kill and you get all the HP back and it's fine. But yeah, overall, really, really good game. Immediately huge advantage when the Tapu Bulu goes down. But then in the mid-game, I kind of, partly, I don't press that as well as I could have done. Partly, there's a few turns where, like, any variety of things could happen, and there's so much that he could go for, so many possibilities that it is really hard to get that correct every single time. Partly just Cap did very well to start clawing it back. But yeah, it got a lot closer despite my initial advantage, which is testament to how good of a player Cap is to claw all of that back. And then in the end, we had this very dramatic moment of everyone thinking that I'd thrown, until the Yachi Berry. So with that, that is my longest ever video. I'm very impressed with myself for doing all of this in the first take, because a lot of the shorter videos take more takes than that. But if you've stuck it out for all of this time, then thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you soon with some more games. Goodbye.